The Mecklenburg County election debates are a service of WTVI, Mecklenburg County, and the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. The views and opinions expressed in these debates are those of the candidates and do not necessarily represent the views of WTVI, its management, Mecklenburg County, or the League of Women Voters.
PBS Charlotte and the League of Women Voters present Election Debate 2016.
Hello, I'm Jeff Rivenbark with PBS Charlotte, and welcome to the 2016 general election debate sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. During the next 20 minutes, you'll hear from two candidates in the North Carolina State Senate District 37 race. Questions for today's debate were provided by the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. The candidates were not given the questions in advance. I'll call on the candidates in random order, and you will have 30 seconds to respond. Each candidate will have 3 challenges during the debate, and you will be allowed to make a 30-second closing statement at the very end. And now let's meet the two candidates for NC State Senate District 37. Bob Diamond is the Republican candidate, and Jeff Jackson is the Democrat candidate. Gentlemen, so nice to have you here.
Thanks, Jeff.
The first question is, does the legislature have any role to play in diffusing situations like the recent protest and racial tension in Charlotte? Why or why not? We're looking again for a 30-second response, and we begin with Bob Diamond.
Would you repeat the question again? I'm sorry.
Does the legislature have any role to play in diffusing situations like the recent protest and the racial tension in Charlotte? Why or why not?
Well, apparently, when they saw things got out of hand, and they did call in the National Guard and to stop business from being looted and stuff like that. So at that point, but apparently the mayor was asked to come in earlier, but she didn't do that. But they came in and made order. So yes, the governor brought in the National Guard, which he should have done.
All right, thank you. Mr. Jeff Jackson.
The General Assembly has 3 basic things that we can do. The first thing is focus on issues of economic mobility. The second thing is focus on issues of criminal justice. And on bottom, focusing on issues of police tactics and transparency. So when it comes to economic mobility, we need to stop underfunding public education, which has been a major problem for the last few years. On issues of criminal justice, we need to make sure that we have equity in that area. As a former criminal prosecutor, I can speak at length to some of the experiences that I've had there. And when it comes to police tactics and transparency, we need to make sure that things like body cameras are widely available. And we need to make sure that that video is easily accessed.
All right, thank you. Our second question is, where do you stand on House Bill 972, enacted by the legislature to prohibit release of body cam videos without a court order? We're looking for a 30-second response. Mr. Jeff Jackson.
I was one of 2 people in the state Senate who voted against House Bill 972, which really clamped down on the ability of the public to see the videos that we get from dash cams and body cams worn by police officers. I voted against it because it enabled a situation where if you were mistreated by the police, say once you were stopped for a speeding ticket, it made it very difficult for you to see the video, even if you yourself were pictured in that video. You have to go to court if the police say no, and then once you go to court, it's really difficult to win because you have to prove that the police abused their discretion, which is the highest civil standard under the law. I'm proud to have voted against it.
Again, the question is, where do you stand on House Bill 972, enacted by the legislature to prohibit release of body cam videos without a court order? 30-second response, Mr. Bob Diamond.
My understanding, I have been a court reporter and legal clerk in the past, so I understand evidence and that kind of rules of evidence. So the question is whether or not they be released too early so they affect the outcome of a trial or what have you. The idea is that you want to have them released at a proper time so that everybody can see what actually happened, but so it doesn't interfere with the trial.
All right, and we're going to have a follow-up question to that. Do you believe police officers should be required to have their body cams on when they are responding to an incident? Mr. Jackson, we go to you first.
I don't think you should have a uniform policy at this point because body cameras are new and we're still learning best practices. We have police officers who have reported back to us just in the few short months in which we've had body cameras that some potential victims are really uncomfortable disclosing certain details about what happened while those body cameras are on. I think it's important to give police officers some discretion there. I think we're going to learn a lot about best practices over the next year or so.
Mr. Diamond, your response.
Well, there is a lot to learn, and what we've seen in the past is that the body cams, if they're on all the time, there's a huge data storage problem. It costs a lot of money to store that data, so you only need an officer should know when he should turn it on, And those rules aren't solid yet, but we do need to remember the fact that they're there for the officer and for the people to actually determine what's going on, because witnesses that don't have a clue sometimes, so many different stories from the same event, so the camera will tell the truth.
All right, our next question is, even though the North Carolina Constitution gives the legislature power to overrule local ordinances, are they abusing that power with recent actions like HB 2? Please explain your response. We'll go to Mr. Bob Diamond.
As far as HB 2 is concerned, the Charlotte City Council went way above their authority to regulate bathrooms and that kind of thing. So, but because they're going against their authority, then they had to respond and shut it down before it became law. So it had to be reversed as a law. And that's a lot harder to do.
Mr. Jackson, your response.
The Charlotte City Council did not exceed its authority. If it had, we would know it, because the leaders of the General Assembly could have sued the Charlotte City Council. They would not have had to pass a law. The fact is, we have seen regularly now from folks in Raleigh, the top leadership in the General Assembly, they like to take a whack at Charlotte basically every session. And they are doing that because they think it is in their political best interest. With our sales tax, with our local ordinance, with our airport, they continually take whacks at Charlotte. I'm there as someone who stands up to them. As a former criminal prosecutor and as a current soldier, I have no problem pushing back when they get out of line.
Our next question is, would you support an independent commission redistricting legislative and congressional districts? Why or why not? Mr. Jackson.
The very first bill I ever filed was to end gerrymandering and implement independent redistricting, which is something I really appreciate the League of Women Voters being in strong support of. And look, this is something that my party doesn't have clean hands on. When my party was inside, we gerrymandered to make sure more Democrats win. Now that the Republicans in charge, they have taken our art to a science, and they have absolutely maximized the number of Republicans that can win. We need to take the pen out of the hands of the politician. We need to put voters back in charge of choosing their representatives.
Thank you. Again, the question is, would you support an independent commission of redistricting legislative and congressional districts? Why or why not? Mr. Diamond.
Well, absolutely, because I think both sides should be represented. It should be fair, and I don't have any problem with that.
Our next question, citizens demand tax cuts, but also demand better education, health care, roads, technology improvement, etc. How do you balance these conflicting demands? And Mr. Diamond, we go to you first.
I'm sorry, the question again.
Citizens demand tax cuts, but also demand better education, health care, roads, technology improvement, etc. How do you balance all of these conflicting demands?
It's like anything else. You have to get the facts on hand so you can make a decision. You have to just determine what your goals are and what the cost will be. And if you've been around long enough, you see enough data, then you can start making those decisions. But you have to make it on individual items. You can't make a blanket assessment of it.
Mr. Jackson?
Oh, I agree with Bob. I think you actually have to look at data and look at evidence and not take a strictly ideological approach to it. And what we've seen over the last 5 years with the current majority is they've taken a strictly ideological approach to cutting taxes, whereby they have to do it every single year as much as they possibly can. And as a result, we are seriously underfunding public education, the university system, the community college system, K through 12. The reason we are 41st in the nation in teacher pay is because of their ideological approach to tax cuts. The reason we are 45th in the nation in per student spending is because of their ideological approach. We need a balanced approach to taxation.
Do you favor the establishment of a dedicated state funding source for the North Carolina Housing Trust Fund? Mr. Jackson, we go back to you.
Well, I think it's something we should consider because public housing and affordable housing is a major concern. Charlotte City Council just yesterday said that they're committed to accelerating their timeline of having 5,000 more affordable units here in Charlotte. Instead of in 5 years, they're going to try and do it in 3 years. This is a way that the state could play a major role in assisting the city in accomplishing that goal. As we continue to grow and we're adding millions of people over the next few years, we're going to need to make this a higher priority than it has been.
Thank you. Again, the question is, do you favor the establishment of a dedicated state funding source for the North Carolina Housing Trust Fund? Mr. Diamond.
I don't see any problem as long as the money is tied to a vehicle of some sort, so you know what it's being used for and where it comes from. I have no problem with that.
Our next question is, does it make sense not to expand Medicaid when North Carolina loses federal tax dollars by not expanding health care coverage for more people and thereby creating more jobs in the health industry? 30-second response, Mr. Diamond.
Well, that's a false premise because you do not create jobs by making more regulation. The free market is the best way to determine what's going on there as far as I'm concerned.
Mr. Jackson?
Medicaid expansion would have added, and independent experts agree, tens of thousands of jobs here in North Carolina, in addition to saving over 1,000 lives every year. And the most that we ever would have paid for it is 10% of the total cost. Make no mistake, the reason we did not expand Medicaid in North Carolina has nothing to do with the merits of the proposal and everything to do with the fact that it came out of the Affordable Care Act. And the Republican Party, which controls the General Assembly, thought it was politically toxic to embrace any aspect of the Affordable Care Act. That's why we don't have Medicaid expansion in North Carolina.
Thank you. Would you reinstate the North Carolina refundable earned income tax credit to give working families a tax break and thus a boost to the local economy? Why or why not? We're looking for a 30-second response. Mr. Jackson?
Absolutely, 100%. Ronald Reagan called the earned income tax credit one of the greatest poverty-fighting weapons ever created because it exists to help people who are just barely getting by, just barely making ends meet. And it comes in and it helps that group of people. That's one of the most effective ways of combating poverty known to man. It's helpful for children, it's helpful for working families, and we zeroed it out in the General Assembly. It was a big mistake.
Again, the question is, would you reinstate the North Carolina refundable earned income tax credit to give working families a tax break and thus a boost to the local economy? Why or why not, Mr.
No, I actually wouldn't. The North Carolina just raised the amount you pay no taxes on from $6,000 to $17,500. So it's $11,500 benefit to everybody who files taxes. So that's already been taken care of in that adjustment.
All right, thank you. Our next question, we are looking for a 1-minute response. What kind of state plan is needed to ensure water quality and supply in the long term, considering recent coal ash spills, droughts, flooding, conflicting regulations, etc.? Mr. Diamond, we go to you first.
Okay, as far as water is concerned, that is not the federal government's business to control our water. The coal ash thing is overblown because, as you remember, as a farmer kid, we used to make lye soap out of coal ash. So it's not scary like people kind of get you to believe. But the water should be kept clean, so that you yourself have fresh water to bathe and cook with and what have you. But it's not the government's business, the federal government, to tell us what to do with our water.
All right, thank you. Mr. Jackson?
Well, first of all, here in Charlotte, we are ultimately going to face a water quantity problem. We are growing very quickly, and we are going to outstrip our water supplies. We need to have a plan in place for that, and we do actually have a plan in place for that. It's going to be something that's going to be pretty aggressive over the next few years, and I think it's going to meet our needs. Excuse me, with respect to coal ash is a major problem. We have 100 million tons of it across the state, and we are going to have to take care of it. We're going to have to either excavate it or cover it and then monitor it, and it's going to take hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to contain, but we need to do a really good job. People on both sides of the aisle, again, this isn't a partisan issue, people on both sides of the aisle recognize this is a major environmental threat. We can't have spills, we can't have leaks, we can't have groundwater contamination. We're making some major investments there. Duke is a partner in that. We've got a timeline. We're all going to argue about the timeline, but it is going to take years to clean all of this up. As to fracking, I was opposed to fracking. I'm glad that I was opposed to fracking. We don't need it here in North Carolina, and we don't have enough gas to make the risk worth it anyway.
All right, thank you. Our next question, lots of layers to this one, so we'll begin with, what is your position on the sale of military-style weapons, high-capacity long guns, to civilians? How do you think continued sales and ownership of such weapons will impact the levels of violence and deaths in our country? What safeguards, legislation can you suggest? We're going to go 30 seconds, and Mr. Jackson, to you.
That is a huge question for 30 seconds, but we'll see what we can do. I'm in my 14th year in the military right now. I'm a captain in the National Guard. I served a tour in Afghanistan. When I was in Afghanistan, I carried an M16 and it had a grenade launcher strapped to the bottom of it. When I came home, my sergeant said, "Jackson, give me your weapon." I gave him my weapon, and I've never thought for a minute since then, I really need an assault rifle right now. And most Americans agree. We do not need assault rifles. They do not need to be available to civilians. And one day, we're going to fix that, and the world will be fine.
Mr. Diamond.
I'm a Vietnam vet myself, and I'm very familiar with weapons. I was raised in the South, where you go hunting as part of your search for manhood and what have you. An assault rifle is only as a rifle. It's the same weapons he's talking about. If you point at somebody, you're assaulting them. If it's laying on the counter, it's not an assault vehicle. It's what you do with it. It's not the definition of the rifle itself.
All right, thank
I'm going to
you.
use this.
We have a challenge from Mr. Jackson.
I think that's oversimplifying the issue and a little misleading. An assault rifle is the most deadly weapon a civilian can buy. What we're seeing is that people are buying these weapons and then unloading in elementary schools. Of course this is a problem. And of course we're going to solve this one day. And when we do solve it, the Second Amendment will remain intact. People will continue to go hunting. They'll have weapons for home defense. But we don't need weapons that can kill 30 people in 10 seconds, which is what an M16 fully loaded can do.
Thank you. Our next question is, who do you support for president? And we're looking for a 30-second response. Who do you support for president? Mr. Diamond.
Well, obviously for Mr. Trump, because I'm a free market type person, and Mr. Trump will raise all boats because when they lower taxes and make business regulations lowered, so the average guy can actually start a business rather than go through all the hurdles. The whole country will be raised because if he becomes a president, I'm definitely behind it.
Mr. Jackson.
That was the most articulate defense of Donald Trump that I've heard. I mean, not even Donald Trump has been able to say that much for Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a deeply ignorant madman who has absolutely no business being in the office. He has no business being anywhere near the nuclear codes. Every time he opens his mouth, he embarrasses himself, he embarrasses our country. When he tries to answer difficult questions, it is pure gibberish. It is clear he has no idea what foreign policy is, how it operates. He clearly could not find Iraq on a map if it did not say Iraq. He is the least qualified candidate in American history. He is going to lose. The world will be better for it.
All right, and thank you. And now it is time for our closing statements, and we will begin with Mr. Jackson.
I've been your state senator for the last 2.5 years. I became your state senator when we suddenly needed a new mayor here in Charlotte, and then your old state senator, Dan Clotfelter, became mayor, and I replaced Dan Clotfelter. Since then, it has been my job to stand up for Charlotte. And as we mentioned a little earlier, there are some folks in Raleigh who think that it is to their political advantage to take whacks at Charlotte. Well, it's my job to stand up for you. And that's hard. There are a lot of folks up there who are trying to run roughshod over our city, and it's my job to push back when they need it. I'm also reasonable enough to make deals when there's a deal to be had, but as your state senator, my first job is looking out for you and this city.
Thank you. Mr. Bob Diamond, your closing statement.
Well, I have a lot of business experience as a businessman, as a pharmacy owner, other businesses as well. And as a state senator, my job will be to find out what citizens and voters in Senate 37 need and then do my best to see that it gets done. I will be a servant of the people. I have a long history of standing up for the right against bullies, big business, and government, occasionally taking a beating for doing the right thing, and I haven't changed. My name is Bob Diamond. I want to be your senator and your equalizer in Raleigh.
All right, thank you, Mr. Diamond. Once again, Republican Bob Diamond and Democrat Jeff Jackson are the two candidates in the North Carolina State Senate District race, 37 race, that is. Thanks for taking part in our debate today. We appreciate it. For more information about the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg, go to goleaguego.org. For more information about the candidates, you can go to vote11.org. And we also want to remind Mecklenburg County voters, early voting begins Thursday, October 20th. With 10 locations. The general election is Tuesday, November the 8th. Election day polls will be open from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. I'm Jeff Rivenbark, and on behalf of everyone here at WTVI PBS Charlotte, we appreciate you watching the debates, and we hope you get out to vote.